Good afternoon. Welcome to the joint meeting of the Glendale City Council and the Glendale Housing Authority on November the 30th, 2021, being called to order at 3:06. To help slow the transmission of COVID-19 and protect the health and safety of the community, City Council, as well as board and commission meetings, will continue to be closed to the public for in-person attendance. The public is encouraged to watch and participate from the safety of your homes to practice social distancing. Meetings are broadcast live on Glendale TV, viewable on Spectrum Cable Channel 6 and AT&T UVerse Channel 99. Meetings are also streamed live in high definition on the city's webpage, glendaleca.gov/live, on youtube.com/myglendale, and on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire devices using a free app called ScreenWeave and choosing Glendale TV from the menu. For public comments and questions during this meeting, please call 818-937-8100. Public comments on a specific agenda item will be taken when that agenda item is discussed. Thank you. And with that, roll call, please, Mr. Jimian.
Councilmember Agajanian.
Present.
Brotman.
Here.
Kasakian.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
And Mayor Devine.
Here. And what's your report, please?
The agenda for the Tuesday, November 30th, 2021 joint public meeting of the City Council and the Housing Authority was posted on November 24th, 2021 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Thank you. And what's next?
One would be community service and parks regarding fiscal year 2020 and 2025 analysis of impediments to fair housing choice. A, City Council motion to approve fiscal year 2020 and 2025 analysis of impediments to fair housing choice. B, Housing Authority motion to approve fiscal year 2020 and 2025 analysis of impediments to fair housing choice. Madam Mayor, I think we also have to take in consideration, we have to do roll call for our Housing Authority members.
Thank you.
City Clerk, and I was going to do that right after you finished. So thank you for reminding us. Go ahead, Artie.
Can we have roll call
Councilmember
for housing? Thank you.
Authority member Aginian.
Present.
Agajanian.
Present.
Brotman.
Here.
Devine.
Here.
Najarian. Here. Parazian.
Here.
And Chair Kasakian.
Here. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Galanian?
Yes, good afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of City Council, Housing Chair Kasakian, members of the Housing Authority. I'm just going to turn this item over to Maggie Kavarian, our Senior Community Services Supervisor, to present the item.
Good afternoon, Mayor Devine, Housing Chair Kasakian, members of the City Council, and members of the Housing Authority. We have a brief PowerPoint presentation for you today to review the analysis of impediments to fair housing choice for fiscal year 2020-2025. Basically, we wanted to go over the purpose of why we had to submit this. We have to submit this document. Basically, it's to affirmatively further fair housing, AFFH. And what that means is the purpose is that the city will certify that we are affirmatively furthering fair housing as a condition of HUD compliance and also as best practices. And what are those fair housing protections? They include disability, race, sex, color, national origin, religion, and family status. And in completing the analysis, the preparation of that has to identify barriers, take actions on potential impediments, if impediments or barriers are found or if they exist. And then what we do with the document is we maintain records of actions and efforts to overcome identified impediments. A little brief history on the time frame and how we came to produce this document. Prior to 2015, the city would complete an analysis of impediments to fair housing and submit that to HUD, and that was a requirement to receive federal funding for our CDBG, our home and ESG programs. In 2015, the Obama administration added a new AFFH rule, which is an assessment tool, an assessment of fair housing, a little bit more complicated and complex. When the Trump administration came in, they evaluated that 2015 rule. They suspended it, and then ultimately they repealed the rule. We were going back and forth with our HUD field office on how to proceed, whether to wait on the assessment of fair housing tool or to move forward with the analysis of impediments like we had done in the past. The guidance came back from HUD field office to continue to submit the analysis of impediments as a means of compliance, and hence we are here today. Currently, the Biden administration is looking at a voluntary process for HUD municipalities like ours to identify and assess fair housing concerns. So this is where we stand at this time. Now, we worked with a consultant, Veronica Tam and Associates, and she is here today. Veronica Tam is here with us today if we have additional questions after the presentation is completed. She worked with us to do stakeholder outreach and surveys. We had 2 public meetings in 2019, one meeting with residents and one with social services and housing services providers. We also prepared a fair housing survey, which we posted online through SurveyMonkey. And we also had hard copies at throughout Glendale facilities, community centers. And overall, we had 752 surveys submitted back to us and then entered for data collection. Other analysis tools used by our consultant was census data, American Community Survey, our previous analysis of impediments from 2011, and the Glendale housing element from 2014 to 2021 was also used with additional resources as well. We posted a public notice for a 30-day comment period per HUD regulations, and we did that from September 30th of this year to October 29th for public comment, so they could review the draft analysis. Residents could review the draft analysis. We received no comments. So I wanted to go over the 12 impediments with the Council and Housing Authority that were reviewed and are included in the document. They include housing discrimination, fair housing education and outreach, accessibility, segregation, homeowner education, minority outreach, land use regulations, access to financing, access to services, housing rehabilitation, discriminatory advertising, and ADA accessibility. We wanted to touch upon a few of those impediments and give you a brief highlight, actions and efforts that the city has taken on some of these impediments. We wanted to present housing discrimination and fair housing education and outreach and what action has been taken. We wanted to include the research that was done for developing a historical context statement to understand Glendale's history pertaining to its past and acknowledge the past history of racially exclusiveness, the sundown town. We also included rental rights program, which includes just cause eviction ordinance, right to lease, and renter relocation. The city also contracts with Housing Rights Center as a fair housing services provider to investigate housing discrimination complaints. We get about 5 to 10 of those each year. And then the city also promotes fair housing workshops for tenants, a separate one for tenants and a separate one for landlords annually, and that's also done through our Housing Rights Center contract. A little bit of information on accessibility. Accessibility is a need for housing for persons with disabilities, and actions that the city has taken or continues to offer housing and supportive services to special needs groups like the elderly and homeless to enable independent living. We also included encouraging private and public sectors to produce and assist housing for special needs groups, and a couple of examples of that is our monthly housing subsidy program that was created by the council, and also the upcoming Harrower Village affordable housing project for seniors as a couple of examples of that. And then we get to land use regulations, efforts, actions and efforts. So the impediment is that current land use regulations require updates to certain ordinances and actions and efforts that have been taken. So efforts to implement provisions of the new state laws. One of them was accessory dwelling units, which was already completed in 2020. The other three, emergency shelter ordinance and supportive housing density bonus, are all going to be amended. The zoning code will be amended by 2022. In the current document, currently it shows 2021, but we're behind or delayed by about a year. Therefore, we come to you requesting the approval of the 2020-2025 analysis of impediments to fair housing choice. This concludes my presentation. It is brief, but again, we do have our consultant, Veronica Tam, here. If you have any questions or if I can answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gabarian. Any questions or comments from my colleagues?
Yes,
Councilmember Agajanian.
on page, where is this? 7, page 7, can you go to page 7? On item 11, what it means discriminatory advertising? You mean the housing, we are the government, we are the housing authority. Are we talking about that we're going to do discriminatory advertising? That I,
Maggie, do you want me to respond to that?
Yes, Veronica, if you can.
It's on
Thank you.
page 6, Ms. Kavarian.
page 7.
Yeah, sure. When we did the analysis, we actually went and take a look at advertising that are listed on websites and Craigslist and some other rental listing services. And we note all those rental listing by private landlords or management companies that are not really complying with the requirements, and then when they list rental properties and also homes for sale, a lot of them, sometimes they would include language that is against fair housing laws, that specifically would speak to a preference to a particular group. And so the recommendation is to have your fair housing service provider to continue to monitor them and advise them that these type of languages are prohibited by fair housing laws. Not that the city does that, but the city needs to have your contractor monitor it more often, because a lot of times, particularly on Craigslist, when individual property owners not as familiar with fair housing laws may use language that they're not aware that are violating fair housing laws.
Okay, now, so we have to monitor that private person when they advertise. They are doing such that we are not discriminating, that they are not discriminating, that we have
Correct.
to have control over their advertisement?
The city has the service, you contract with the Housing Rights Center to provide fair housing outreach, education, and enforcement services. So one of their responsibility is to monitor advertising and then educate the landlords and management companies that that's not the right language to use.
Okay, thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Madam.
you. Anyone?
I have a question, Madam Mayor.
Councilmember Najarian.
So with regard to the housing discrimination and the discussion of the first bullet point on page 8, complete the research analysis of developing a historical context statement that identifies and understands Glendale's history pertaining to its racist past. So is this a backward-looking document, or are you looking to see if there's discrimination that exists now? Because if it's backward, I'm not sure looking backward is the intent of this whole activity and action. It's furthering fair housing. Is the goal, but, I mean, what's your thought with that? And what groups are you dealing with when you're looking at that item? Maybe we can give you some suggestions.
Madam Mayor,
Essential, go ahead, sorry.
Madam Mayor, members of the City Council, this is the context statement, the sundown, that goes with the sundown ordinance. It is a look back to see if there were practices in Glendale that might still be around or that had caused unintentional bias. It's a way for us just to look into the past and see if any of those practices are still unknowingly being conducted. Not necessarily maliciously, but unknowingly.
Right, so I think we need to remember that many of those practices that occurred, were they to occur now, would be a direct violation of the Fair Housing Act. So back then, they didn't have the Fair Housing Act to rely on and to bring action with. So, I mean, I just want to make sure that this document is looking forward, and that we not, dwell in the past. Glendale has already made a statement on that, and we still get discussion on it. But I'd like to see, I'm sure you have limited resources and time, looking at the current situation and maybe prospectively, rather than going back to the, I imagine at that time it says, colored people need not apply, or, not for rent-a-colored people, whatever term they used at that time. I mean, that's just my thought. I think we should be looking forward, the current situation, and looking forward.
Maggie, let me also mention something about that. The historical background is in the document, but you are absolutely correct. The document is looking more on the majority of the document is looking at the current trends and practices. So in one section of the the analysis of impediments to fair housing choice, we looked at the recent trends in terms of fair housing records collected by your fair housing contractor to look at the nature and extent of fair housing discriminatory acts in the last 5 years or so. So we do look at what's the current trend, and then the actions included in the housing element is future speaking, not looking backward.
And are you going to let us know? I mean, if you uncover practices that are that we're not aware of and that haven't been reported to, whether it's the Department of Real Estate or the Fair Housing Authority.
The report does have that information in there. I'm going to go to that portion of the document, but it does speak to what are the current trends, and there are some cases, not a lot, but there are, every jurisdiction have some of that. And a lot of times residents would call and file a complaint, and the Housing Rights Services, the Housing Rights Center, your contractor would investigate and see if there are any merits to the complaint. And if there are merits to the complaint, usually what they do is education and counseling, and then they move on to mediation. Most of the time, those would be resolved through education and counseling.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Authority Member Ajinian.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, is there any reflection on yesterday's article in the LA Times about Glendale's racial exclusiveness about sundown town, about concerning the mobile showers? Is there any reflection on this? Perhaps maybe Ruby Golanya could make a comment on that article? It was an extensive, huge article.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council, members of the Housing Authority, Chair Kasakian, these two items are not related. They're independent of each other. What you see in front of you today and what was presented is impediments to the housing, as opposed to it was an ancillary service that was provided for a while in the City of Glendale, the Showers of Hope.
And that was for the homeless, correct? Mr.
For
Galani, and that.
Yes, for the unhoused, the homeless population, yes.
And Madam Mayor, I'd like to
Yes,
also
sir.
just say that, not on the topic of this specific report, which I thank staff for, and I think you did a very fine job. On that article, Mr. Jemian, I would just say that it looked as though the article was making certain leaps and conclusions based on some, I think, staff actions that were perhaps misguided, but not, I think, intended to discriminate people by race. Obviously, anytime we have a program, our intention is to serve our population first. And I would say to the LA Times reporter and to anyone reading those articles, that goes for pretty much most cities. Most cities are looking, most city councils are looking to serve their domestic population in need first. But I think the leap was made that somehow, and there was a quote in there saying, well, Glendale was this way, and this pretty much keeps Glendale the way it is by this act of exclusion, this unintended or mistaken act of exclusion. And to that, I would say that Glendale has come a long way from the days when there were sundown laws in this city. As someone who's grown up in this city, as someone who's experienced both discrimination and seen discrimination inflicted upon others, Glendale is certainly not the city that it was. Are there vestiges of that past? Certainly there are. And I don't know how many generations it will take for that to completely dissipate and disappear, but I think it does a disservice to a lot of people, both in the city and that department and the individuals quoted in that article who do a phenomenal job and who continue to do the work that needs to be done to house or unhoused and provide services to those in greatest need.
Yeah, Madam Mayor.
Let's get back to, go ahead, Mr. Galanian.
No,
I was gonna-
that's fine. I was just going to say, before the city attorney stops me, I just wanted to get on the record, follow up to Housing Chair Kasakian's comments. Under some of the items, the references in that article, LA Times, are absolutely inaccurate. Mr. Bulanikian's here, and he can attest that majority, more than 50% of our homeless population that we're serving are actually outside Glendale. So what was said and mentioned in the article is inaccurate.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Galanian. So let's get back to our agenda item, which is the fair housing choice. Are there any other comments or questions from my colleagues?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, it's Dan Brotman.
Go ahead, Member Brotman.
Yeah, so I kind of have a general question about how this report relates to the work that we do for our housing element, because we have requirements now, to affirmatively further fair housing, right? And, like this seems to be like impediments, so removing impediments. But that's, obviously really different from taking actions to kind of maybe redress some of those historical consequences, right? So I'm just kind of interested in like, how do the two relate, impediments and proactive actions that we would take, and I think it relates to what Councilmember Najarian was saying. Like we have this passed, maybe some of those things are still going on, but probably not a whole lot. But we have the legacy of the past. I mean, everybody knows we have an almost minuscule African American population here, and so definitely there's carryover. So I think that what we're supposed to be doing in the housing element is like looking at how do we actually move and change the situation on the ground to make up for kind of what happened in the past. So could you kind of talk about that connection?
And that would, Councilmember Baumann, thank you for the question, because that would lead me to one of my questions that I asked in Chapter 8 of the report, impediments and actions. And for each one of the actions, there is a comment of whether it is ongoing. And I asked, does that mean that we're working on this? It's a kind of a fluid situation. It's these actions that we are continuing to work on. To try to modify to mitigate these impediments. Is that kind of what he's talking about, what he's asking?
I think they're, Madam Mayor, members of the council, Mr. Chairman, members of the Housing Authority. I think they're two different things. In the time frame, we will call out when are those actions going to be carried out? And then if there's a timeline or if there's a date, when will they be completed? Some of these are things that we just do as normal practice, and they're ongoing. They don't ever end because it is something that either we feel strongly about, is best practice, right thing to do, those types of things. I think what Mr. Brotman was asking is, how are these two documents related? They're very similar in nature, and I'll give you an example on the housing element. If you remember, I think it's the second to the last slide, it talks about some of the zoning changes that need to take place. Well, those zoning changes are to have things like supportive services as a permitted use in zone, homeless shelters as a permitted use in a zone, so that those are able to be developed by anybody in the proper zone. Now, in Glendale, a couple of things. If the state law says that you have to do it and incorporate it into your zoning code, even if we haven't incorporated into our code yet, we follow that state law, and we have. And the second is, I think in Glendale, and certainly Maggie, Onig, and the team could talk more to it, but we have supportive services, we have homeless shelters. Those are things that we promote in the city. So this, in some respects, may say, in the housing element, adopt those things that will come with that process.
Mr. Brotman, Councilmember Brotman, does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I don't know if it was partly a question and partly just something that we should all think about. I mean, I think that we probably all agree we need to go beyond removing impediments, right? We need to find ways where we start to, redress the sins of the past, in a sense, right? Because, I mentioned the small African-American population, that's just one thing, but I think, that's pretty glaring. And I think in general, we should be thinking, like, what can we do as a city to start to kind of, make up for some of those or address some of those kind of historic patterns that we see now in our city. And I don't know, I mean, that's probably goes beyond what we're discussing today, but I'd like us to maybe we should be thinking about that, maybe thinking about policies around, how we kind of address that past.
Sure. And not to speak for management services, but the context statement, I think, is the first step in that whole discussion that the council will have, and I would anticipate many policies to follow that to address the very things that you're asking.
Yeah, thanks.
Any other comments? I just wanted to say one of the parts of the report that concerned me was the reporting of incidents of discrimination and how we're dealing with this. And it mentions that, people call the Housing Rights Center. Do all of our renters, how do they get the word out that this is where they should be calling? Because they said they didn't know where to call. They didn't think anything would happen if they did. How does this information get disseminated to our renters?
Mayor Devine, members of the City Council and Housing Authority, we have our housing division that produces that information, as well as our Community Services and Parks Department, which fields calls from residents. We usually try to take calls that are, depending on what population we're serving. For instance, if it's the senior population, we take that call on, or we have nonprofit organizations that we spread the word to, and we let their clients also know about the Housing Rights Center and what the Housing Rights Center provides. So it's a joint collaboration between Housing Division and our Community Services and Parks Department. We try to do our best with getting our tenant workshops advertise through social media, through GTV6, and our newsletters and our city connections as much as possible. We try to get, as we've been going on and on with the pandemic, we've noticed that the workshops that are online tend to do much better than they did in person from 2 years ago. So we will continue to do workshops online, and I think that has been helping our residents, and they are learning more and more about their rights.
Thank you, thank you. Well, this was a really comprehensive report, I have to say, and interesting as well, I hope that we can move forward with some policy working off of this document. If there are no other comments, can I get a motion from?
Madam Mayor, I just want to add one more thing that in this report, I think that it's important to note the actions that we have taken as a body in terms of housing for individuals with disabilities, which was mentioned as one of the impediments. And it's been this council and the actions of requiring that whenever an affordable housing project that the city partners with another group is built, that we have now included units for those with disabilities. And I don't know of any other city that is doing that explicitly with that specific goal. So I mean, we are making our best efforts to eliminate whatever impediments we can. Certainly there's a constant room for improvement because we hold ourselves to a high standard, but we're moving in absolutely the right direction. So thank you, Ms. Kavarian, and thank you to the staff who worked on this.
May I move item 1 for city council?
Okay, do we have a second? Councilmember Agajani has moved the item.
Second.
Okay, roll call for council, please.
Councilmember Agajanian,
Yes.
Brotman,
Yes.
Kasakian,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Mayor Devine
Yes.
for housing.
For housing, may we have a motion and a
Yes.
second?
May I move the item 1 for housing authority?
And I'll second that.
I'll second.
Oh,
And may we have roll call, please? It was seconded by Member Brasian.
Authority Member Aginian,
Yes.
Agajanian,
Yes.
Brotman,
yes.
Devine,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Barazian,
Yes.
and Chair Kasakian.
Yes.
Thank you. What's next, please?
Next item is adjournment.
For
Move to
council,
adjourn.
please?
Move to adjourn.
Second. Is there a motion for housing?
Move to adjourn for housing.
Second?
Second.
Thank you.
Okay, we are adjourned at 3:38. Thank you.
Thank you.
See ya. Okay, we will move on to Glendale City Council. Call to order the Glendale City Council meeting for November 30th, 2021, being called to order at 3:39. And again, to slow the transmission of COVID-19 and protect the health and safety of the community, City Council as well as board and commission meetings will continue to be closed for the public for in-person attendance. You're encouraged to watch from home and participate from the safe harbor of your homes. Meetings are broadcast live on Glendale TV, Spectrum Cable 6, ATT Uverse Channel 99, on Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire, and YouTube and Glendale, YouTube and what was the other one? glendale.gov/live. For public comments and questions during the meeting, call 818-937-8100. Public comments on a specific agenda item will be taken when that agenda item is discussed. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Agajanian,
Present.
Brotman,
Here.
Kasakian,
Here.
Najarian,
Here.
and Mayor Devine.
Here. What's next, please?
1 is closed session. 1A, conference with legal counsel pending litigation, Kayayan versus the City of Glendale, LASC case number BC 708-782. B, conference with legal counsel pending litigation, City of Glendale et al. Versus Kemp Brothers Construction Incorporated et al. LASC case number 19STC B37455.
Thank you. Mr. Garcia, do you expect to report out on either of these items?
Madam Mayor, we anticipate reporting out on item 1B.
All right, okay, then we are recessed to closed session. Thank you.